Right. So, welcome, folks. I guess this is part of One Punch Combo. My channel no longer exists, but here we are. So, saw a lot of talk about M Bison, the new Street Fighter season, and there is reason to celebrate, even if you're not excited for the particular patch, the batches of characters, because ultimately it means we're going to get bigger and better things in the fighting game community. Um, so let's get started. Street Fighter 6 had a lot to prove and still does. I'm seeing a lot of dooming, as is on brand for online discourse nowadays, but this year two of Street Fighter 6 is actually important for many reasons, including if the character you want isn't in the game yet, and even possibly Capcom's next big fighting game that it isn't Street Fighter 7. First and most importantly, Street Fighter 6 sold well, while Street Fighter, you have year two here, while Street Fighter 5 performed similarly. Um, the sales petered out almost immediately to be replaced with Black Ops 3. And for perspective, we're into, I think, Black Ops 6 now, which is kind of nuts. But yeah, as is made apparent by layoffs and general corporate cowardice, companies are very scared of the current economy, and on top of it all, it's an election year. Speaking specifically for Capcom, their gamble on esports did not pay off with Street Fighter V and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, causing their sterling reputation to be tarnished with their core audience, if not the partner they had in Marvel as well. I say all that to say if Street Fighter 6 was a repeat of the failure of Street Fighter 5, Capcom may have withdrawn from the fighting game genre completely for the time being. Potentially a second fighting game Dark Age, which isn't completely true, but hopefully you understand what I mean by that. Instead, with Yoshinori Ono gone and the CEO's son being in charge of Monster Hunter, new ideas are making their way into Capcom, regardless if they're ready or not. This ultimately is a good thing. Street Fighter V told us if a character was returning, they'd be radically different. Of course, we all remember Hot Ryu and Chun, but not until 6 did they commit to these new appearances, and even doing the unthinkable, putting Luke, a newcomer, on the cover, by his lonesome even. This combined with a new approach, minus the esports, gave us a game that people loved and was supported by Capcom, albeit it be at a very slow burn this time. The biggest thing I've been trying to tell people with SNK's return to the proverbial ring and Capcom rekindling flames with other fighting games devs is the next Versus game isn't out of the question as it has seemed. Sure, Marvel vs. Capcom 4 may be off of the table, but the rivalries that were formed in the 90s became friendships and, even more importantly, alliances. Over the past couple of years, and what I like to call the post-Ono era, we've seen Ryu and Chun show up in other fighting games, but not the other way around. Street Fighter proper, the Versus series, was regular enough so that there'd be very little reason for them to have guest characters in their their mainline Street Fighter stuff. Has never had guest characters, so this truly is a big and an unprecedented moment. I can even see Street Fighter taking the Tekken approach of guest character per season, if not two, since they plan on supporting this game for a long time. But as I said on the top of this is good news. If companies are working together, that means the possibility for them to do more than just be okay with re-releasing an old game they both have the rights for, or an arcade cab. Tekken Cross Street Fighter is still alive according to Harada-san, but what if that just materializes as Jin and Animal guest character starring in year 3. I have Reina here for reference, Ragna the Blood Edge, and Nagoriyuki in season 4. Goku and Sword of Kingdom Hearts fame as season 8. While I'm exaggerating a bit, this also makes sense for Capcom financially and, quote unquote, politically, to go ahead with Capcom versus SNK 3, or the SNK equivalent, but if you've been following, you probably know that we're really only getting one of those, most likely. We know Darkstalkers is not likely, as Capcom has said with the most recent collection, that doesn't indicate a new game. But even if that means a Capcom versus Capcom is in our future, which is all possibly heralded by Ingrid, that's still a thing. Um, While I'm not the biggest fan with M. Bison returning for story reasons, let's see. Do we have one of those in there? Yep, okay. Street Fighter 6 has really taken a hard look under the microscope to make these iterations of characters as fun and interesting than they've ever been in a core game. I definitely remember the days of Street Fighter fans begging for Ryu to have his donkey kicked back, but combined with the drive system, which is like a grounded Roman cancel a la Guilty Gear, this is it. You have JP, who seems to be drawn more from anime or SNK games, and some characters such as Dalsum retain some of their larger changes from Street Fighter V. But my point is, ultimately, while the RA engine may have given characters a visual makeover, Street Fighter VI really took a look at how these characters play as well. And so we can say the same for Bison. Charred characters in particular aren't popular, so we know Nakayama-san and co. are looking hard at whether to even keep that aspect of the characters in place, as we saw Aki being motion instead of charge. We have evidence that she was charged prior to release and very, very powerful, but she is no longer charged. Though we haven't seen much of Bison's gameplay, that's not true as of time. Today, we have seen a lot of footage. I'm guessing the embargo is over. They've taken moves from the EX games, from Omega Mode, and probably even more. We know how reverent the current Street Fighter team is, with them making Cammy's Level 2 a direct tie to the anime movie. As a non-Bison player, he's even got sort of an upside-down combo, which is very interesting stance. And to differentiate it, we have a lot of backward stances. I doubt it's going to be that in-depth, but, a man can dream. Again, going back to Bison, he isn't the 100% the old Bison we knew. Most strikingly, he's not using Psycho Power, but Soul Power as well. That, combined with drastically different intro, makes me think of him less as somehow Palpatine returned, and a bit more interesting as a man who has possibly a new purpose. Seemingly a more brutal mirror of Ryu, though we already had that in the form of Akuma, but who knows? We don't have the actual world tour and whatever's happening there. We do know that JP is supposed to be the de facto bad guy of this game. While I don't think this is the most interesting direction the story could have gone in, it still might turn out fine. Another piece of the announcement that's huge is that it wasn't leaked. Fighting game rosters and DLC for probably like the last 2 decades, it wasn't a question of if the roster would leak, but when. Well, I do think Capcom's rearranged their DLC at the last minute because of the crossover, since they had promised a psychic character. Let's see. Which I guess you might be able to consider Bison psychic, but he's more psycho. But I digress. I really think that the crossover here, because that's going to be a time-limited thing based on rights, sort of pushed the psychic character, whether that would have been Rose or Manat, a little bit back. And the fact that we saw this cinematic and it's not all that high quality, it doesn't even have voices. And we know Bison has a voice because we've seen the footage and we've heard Bison a little bit. But yeah, those are some of the major points. What I basically went over is something Maximilian Dude already talked about, so definitely check that out if that's so you need more evidence. There does seem to be a fair number of people who are not watching Max Dude or are not in the know, but then again, there are people who aren't trawling Twitter for this sort of thing. But yeah, there's a lot of shared DNA between SNK and Capcom. And I actually have put a bit of a rough timeline here. So just so people understand, obviously there's absolute newcomers who aren't going to know any of this, but there might be some people who are in the scene but may not have been aware of this. But let's just go through the timeline very quickly here. Capcom and SNK, they pretty much started out together. Street Fighter was first. With Street Fighter 1, I can't remember exactly who, but Street Fighter 1 developer ended up going to SNK and made Fatal Fury and King of Fighter, and the rest is history there. But more relevantly, we go to like the early 2000s with Capcom versus SNK 1 and 2. Those games were successful, and those were on the Capcom side. SNK versus Capcom was not as successful and was not as great of a game. They had some interesting character choices, but really it did not do much to move the needle. And as you may or may not know, SNK ended up dying. They are alive again in a different form and backed by Saudi money. But yeah, CVS2 and SVC Chaos caused a rift between the two developers. Maximilian Dude, again, going back to the video here, behind the scenes, obviously all this stuff is off the record, so if you're one of the type of people who are going to say, where's the evidence, you're probably not going to find out. But there was a rift between the two companies. However, SNK is back now and doing better than ever. You know, they have multiple future projects. You see a lot of that here. If you're interested in this, you can definitely look it up, but it is on the screen. Pause the video if you have to, etc., etc. But yeah, SNK is back. They're backed by Saudi money. Samurai Showdown did really, really well and is a great game. King of Fighter 15 is still getting support, which I believe is here, or maybe it's on this screen. As KOF 15 is getting a quote-unquote special team, so that is probably the Street Fighter team, but it could just be, you know, some sort of throwback that SNK people would get super excited for. I'm sure there's a couple missing characters like Duck King that we really need to see back in SNK on the EVO finals. But yeah, going back to the timeline, in 2021, Capcom and SNK agreed to re-release SNK versus Capcom, the match of the millennium. Then SNK versus Capcom, Cards Fighters Clash, Neo Geo Pocket Color Selection Volume 2. And while you may not say, who cares, this is not actually Capcom versus SNK 3 or the SNK equivalent, keep in mind we just talked about these companies were not on good terms previously. Now, as you can see with this picture, you have a representative of Capcom and a representative of SNK in the same room, probably talking about fighting games, probably wheeling and dealing. We saw a bit of that in the past with Harada's Bar. We also, a couple more facts that are mentioned in the Maximilian Dude video. No Naomi arcade board games have been made. We haven't seen any collections in over 2 years. Keep in mind, game development is very slow. And another big thing about them talking about, in particular on the SNK side, them saying we want to do another game, Capcom versus SNK game, SNK versus Capcom game. Generally, in the game industry, you don't talk specifics when you say we hope to do something else. And so this is them putting pressure and saying we want to do more, but them also saying we are going to do this if possible. You know, like, if they're not going to get fired, if the suits at the top aren't going to say hell no, then they're going to try and do this. So that's a very important part to keep in mind. More evidence, Season 2 for Street Fighter 6 is not going to be the current versions, the Garo versions. These are the Fatal Fury versions as far as we know. I am sure Costume 2 is going to be like, for Mai and Terry, the Mark of the Wolves versions, and they're going to look great because the RE engine does that. But as of now, they're definitely not. Also, keep in mind, and we're going to go back to this, I know I'm going back and forth, but of course you can pause the video. Terry and Mai are not being released until the later part of the year. With Terry being autumn 2024 and Mai being winter 2025, which a lot of people like to speculate, but basically we're probably talking about the business year winter, which is like can spill over into like February. But the point is, with SNK most likely releasing Fatal Fury City of the Wolves sometime, I would guess, in early 2025 with the rollout they've been doing. Of course, game development is weird and it can change, etc., etc. That's what we're looking at. the release of Mai and Terry is probably to coincide with the release of Fatal Fury City of the Wolves, or even possibly a Capcom versus SNK 3, or a whatever, they probably don't want to call it SVC Chaos 2, but whatever that would be. So just a little bit more perspective there, because I've seen some people saying they don't want to watch the Maximilian Dude video, or they don't believe, because it's definitely people who want another versus game, and this may not be the versus game you want, but I really feel like this is the versus game that's coming. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, folks. So there is one last thing I would like to discuss. Daisuke Ishiwatari of Guilty Gear fame has stated previously he had to kill his darling in order for Guilty Gear to grow. So again, I think this ties into the dooming. A lot of people seem to be very whelmed, if I may use a Young Justice meme there, about Street Fighter 6's second year. But the thing is, game development takes time. I have a feeling that Street Fighter 6 Year 3, now that Street Fighter 6 has proven itself, will be a lot more explosive and have a lot more content people want. But of course, if you're doing a collaboration, that means you have a bargain to fulfill. Capcom, as I'm sure they're on friendly terms now, but Capcom has said we're going to release Terry and Mai, and they have a time period to do that. So as I said previously, I think that's where either Rose or Manat got pushed back, because they have to put out Terry and Mai right now. But yeah, so there was that pushback, and you may not be enthused with what's happening right now, but again, this may tie into people not recognizing or not even being alive when we had a quote-unquote fighting game dark age. It wasn't technically a dark age because non-Capcom games were still going, but this game had to prove itself, and it has proven itself. So hopefully in year 3 and beyond, especially since we have a really good crew with Nakayama and co behind the game, they're going to take what's happening with Street Fighter 6 and give us more really good patches and characters, because this game is going to be around for a very long time. I'm sure if they aren't going to be purely doing this game, and the characters that you want aren't in this game, they're probably going to show up in Capcom versus SNK 3. I mean, I wouldn't put it out of the question. I'm a big fan of Hakan. I wouldn't put it out of the question if Hakan does not show up in Street Fighter 6, at least, in the next couple years, and he ends up in Capcom versus SNK 3. So, I get people are disappointed, but this is good for both fighting games and SNK and Capcom, and that's what we want. It may not be exactly what you want, but please don't be like the person who I was talking to where they said they would rather One Punch Man Season 2 never have came out because it was ugly, versus finding a studio that would be willing to do it under the terms it's being built under. That's what we live in. So unless you are a millionaire, billionaire, and gonna fund these games and characters yourselves, I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, that's it for now. Just wanted to make this pretty quick video with my speculation. Twitter, YouTube, I think Twitch as well. Probably more places you can find me at Raisin B Man. I'll probably be making more videos. Unfortunately, YouTube decided to kill my alternate channels, even though you're supposed to make alternate channels to make sure your SEO is good. But apparently Google is being weird anyway with AIs. Who knows if SEO is even a thing. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, folks. I would definitely appreciate if you left a thumbs up or a comment, and I've even heard people don't know where to get their fighting game news. So if we need to start up One Punch Combo proper again, which was a fighting game news podcast, we can do that. I will definitely need your support if you feel like that's something you want, though. Thanks for tuning in.